a Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, a President of the United States, and a slave born in Virginia around 1799 discovered that their lives, for a brief moment, intersected in a way that changed the course of our nation's history. I'm Tom Army, and this is part 7 of U.S. History online series, Causes of the Civil War, Dred Scott. Roger Taney was born into a wealthy slave-owning family in Maryland. He became an attorney and eventually a member of Andrew Jackson's Democratic Party. He was appointed Attorney General in the Jackson cabinet and played a significant role in the bank wars. For his dedication and loyalty to the president and the party, Jackson appointed him to succeed John Marshall as Chief Justice on the Supreme Court. Taney had been a slave owner, but had freed his slaves. He believed slavery was evil, and he supported colonization. He supported colonization because he was concerned about the growing number of free blacks in the nation. Furthermore, Taney did not believe it was either the federal government's or the court's responsibility to remedy the slave issue. He concluded that the states held the constitutional right to deal with slavery. James Buchanan, the 15th President of the United States, was a product of the old American political system, and his life was coterminous with the young nation. He was born during George Washington's first administration. Buchanan was the last president to have served in the War of 1812. Also, Buchanan was the only president with military experience who was not a military officer. Buchanan ran successfully as a Federalist for a seat in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 1814. He won election to the United States House of Representatives in 1820 and the U.S. Senate in 1834 as a Jacksonian Democrat. Buchanan never lost an election. He became President of the United States as the nation struggled over the issue of slavery. The new president believed the slavery issue should stay out of politics, and his sympathies rested with the states' rights proponents in the South. Dred Scott was born into slavery, and like millions of enslaved people, no one recorded his ancestry, parents, and siblings. Only his name showed up on his master's ledger. Scott's owner, Peter Blough, decided to give up farming in 1830, and he sold Scott to Army surgeon Dr. John Emerson. Scott accompanied his new owner to postings in the Free State of Illinois and the Free Territory of Wisconsin, where Scott met his wife Harriet, before both returned to the slave state of Missouri. After Emerson's death, his wife Irene continued to lease out the Scotts as hired slaves. In 1846, Scott attempted to purchase his and his family's freedom, but Irene Emerson refused. With financial assistance from the family of his previous owner, Peter Blough, Scott and his wife Harriet sued for their freedom. They claimed that they became free automatically because their owner had taken them into a slave-free U.S. territory. A legal precedent favored Scott's claim. It was called the Somerset or Freedom Principle. The principle originated in England and extended certain protections to slaves against arbitrary seizure. It held that in the absence of positive laws, establishing slavery, all persons standing on English or perhaps American soil would be presumed free. Therefore, if a slave entered a free state, the slave was free. In Rachel v. Walker in 1834, the Missouri State Supreme Court had ruled that a U.S. Army officer who took a slave to a military post in a territory where slavery was prohibited had, quote, forfeited his property. Moreover, in January 1850, a St. Louis Circuit Court jury, under the Freedom Principle, found Dred Scott a free man. Counsel for Mrs. Emerson immediately filed an appeal, and in March 1852, the Missouri Supreme Court reversed the lower court's decision. Pro-slavery Justice William Scott wrote the majority's opinion relying on states' rights rhetoric. He argued that times differed from when the courts reached the Walker decision. He said, quote, "Under such circumstances, it does not behoove the state of Missouri to show the least countenance to any measure which might gratify this spirit of abolitionism. She is willing to assume her full responsibility for the existence of slavery within her limits, nor does she seek to share or divide it with others." End quote. By now, Mrs. Emerson's brother, John F.A. Sanford, looked after her interests. Scott sued again, and the federal district court again ruled against him. Finally, in 1856, the United States Supreme Court heard the case, and a clerical error recorded it as Dred Scott v. Sanford. There were three issues in the case. 1. Was Dred Scott a citizen? 2. Was he free? 3. Did Congress have the right to prohibit slavery in the territories? What did the court decide? Well, this question did not have a simple answer. First, Chief Justice Roger Taney wrote that Dred Scott could not sue in a federal court because he was not a citizen. At the time, there was no legal definition of who was a citizen. Taney admitted a state could declare a black as a citizen, as Massachusetts did, but blacks were not federal citizens. The Comity Clause of the U.S. Constitution said states must recognize the citizens of other states. However, Taney said the clause did not apply to blacks. Taney wrote, quote, "Blacks had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit." End quote. The Dred Scott case eventually made the 14th Amendment to the Constitution necessary. Taney wrote that in answer to the second question, Scott was not free because he went back to Missouri. Now, once a slave, permanently a slave. Third, Taney said that Congress could not prohibit slavery in the territories. all Congress could do was protect property rights under the Fifth Amendment. Consequently, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 was unconstitutional. Slavery now existed everywhere except where a state prohibited it. Opponents of the decision declared that Taney's second and third points were invalid. It was obiter dictum. The opponents of the court's decision declared that once Taney wrote that Scott could not sue in a federal court, the case ended. So what followed was not a legal decision, but an opinion of the court, not essential to the decision. Of course, pro-slavery advocates thought otherwise. And remember, President-elect James Buchanan supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act and believed the court should settle the sectional issue of slavery. Since Taney believed the court could solve the sectional conflict, he realized that a 5-4 vote would not look good. To rectify his conundrum, President-elect James Buchanan pressured Associate Justice Robert Cooper Grier of Pennsylvania to join the Southern majority in Dred Scott to prevent the appearance of a sectional bias in the decision. At the time, 4 Southerners, 4 Northerners, and Taney from Maryland sat on the bench. Through Grier, Buchanan learned that the court would hand down a pro-Southern decision. Then, on March 4th, 1857, Buchanan delivered his inaugural address. The decision to address the territorial question, quote, legitimately belongs to the Supreme Court of the United States, before whom it is now pending, and will, it is understood, be speedily and finally settled. To their decision, in common with all good citizens, I shall cheerfully submit, whatever this may be, end quote. 3 days after the inauguration, the court handed down its 7-2 decision with Justices John McLean of Ohio and Benjamin R. Curtis of Massachusetts writing forceful and persuasive dissents. The effects of the decision were almost immediate. The Supreme Court had declared the Republican Party platform unconstitutional. Abraham Lincoln said Republicans would not accept the decision. Stephen Douglas called Lincoln's comments insurrectionist. The decision strengthened Northern opposition to slavery and strengthened the Republican Party. It divided the Democratic Party along sectional lines, and it encouraged Southern supporters of slavery to make bolder demands. The only good from this 11-year ordeal for the Scots was that their owner freed all 4 of them. Dred Scott was buried in the Cavalry Cemetery in St. Louis. The commemorative marker next to the headstone reads, "In memory of a simple man who wanted to be free." In 1857, that wish, shared by 4 million enslaved persons in the United States, moved closer to reality.